very happy to be part of this today, and thank you for having us. And we're very impressed with all the work that each of you are doing. You're making huge impacts on children, on education, and on industries, as well as teachers as researchers and in that direction. We know that these conversations start here. They start with you. We know that conversations also start across publications and in books, in publications through journal articles. This is an example of some of the students that co-authored with me for this book. And we want them to go beyond the knowledge that they have in the classroom. And so Jennifer wanted to mention something about implicit knowledge.
Okay, so what we learn most about is the extraction of implicit and changing it to explicit learning. Implicit learning is when you learn something, but you're not aware that you learned something. And explicit learning is when you're able to say and teach others. So we learn every day how to change implicit learning to explicit learning so we can share with others our knowledge and collaborate with others.
And each time we realize as we teach someone else, we learn something in a different way. It's not enough to just say, I'll absorb the information and I'll take it and take a test on it. But if we can take that information and then make something different of it, or realize that someone sees it in a different perspective, then it starts getting us to question what we actually know, where our knowledge is coming from, and realize that we may not have caught all the conceptual pieces. So part of the model in Renton Prep is to have the older children work with the younger children on various different topics. It could be with STEM, it could be with arts, it could be with history, it could be with geography, and then using technology that helps them to amplify their voices so it goes beyond just that one conversation. It helps teachers to be able to document that knowledge and see what those conversations were like. It's also great with early childhood education because it gives those kids an opportunity to have full sentence conversations where they may not have them at home, and to help bridge some of those literacy gaps. So this was the intersection of technology, digital ink, and some of these projects.
Traditionally, scientific communities would share ideas with each other through print sources and meetings like this, but now that we have the internet, we have faster, more instant, and more widespread ways of sharing with each other. So this, for example, is the docs.com collection where it pulls all kinds of media into a shareable link.
And with that, they're able to submit their homework, their concepts, their group projects online so it's viewable to the public. It's one way that we can use data and analytics for students to get feedback and for them to also use that information to refine their work, redesign, redraft, and recreate. So to realize that they're not just submitting it to a teacher and that's the only one seeing it, but they have a community of other students, other educators, researchers looking at it. What does that do for you, seeing other people are looking at your work?
Well, for example, there was this one project where we had to create tutorials on a product or educational app. And when we submitted it, we made it just for our classmates and a class that we were collaborating with in Philadelphia. But after it was released, we got a message from the CEO of the company that made the app, and they wanted to work with our school. So once that happens to you, it's not just about the class anymore. You have to step up your game almost and be sure that, or make sure that you know that other people will see it, and that kind of makes you want to work harder and polish up your work because you know that people all around the world can see it.
And we realize that's very similar to peer review that we do with scientific journals and publications all the time. It's more about changing the mindset of how we approach education. So if we want these kids to be able to have this skill set, how do we start getting them to think about it as young people? How do we get them to perceive media and realize that, as Jennifer mentioned to me yesterday, you realize quickly with immediate feedback if you've caught someone's attention with social media. Did you get 1,000 views on it? Did you get 1 view? And she was mentioning the difference between teenagers who just get views for the sake of views and for actually getting voice out.
So when you see tweens or teens uploading a video of themselves on Snapchat or making a tweet, that is in its own way a publication. But we can use the internet in a way that these publications are used for better purposes, like education and sharing our story with everybody else.
This is an example of a STEM project that had STEAM in it, and she was creating a gingerbread trap to trap a gingerbread person. Even with schools that don't have a lot of finances to have really high-tech equipment, you can still start training STEM thinking.
For this project, we presented to our class the ideas we had and then got feedback on it through forums. And this is another project that we did based off of a National Geographic Live event about the Spinosaurus. Instead of going the traditional route and writing an essay or something like that, my classmate and I, since we were working together, we made a music video. And those are analytics from Twitter and YouTube. And when you have analytics like that, it's nice to know what works and doesn't work, so that way the next time you publish something, you can make it better.
All of these are accessible on a collection. They'll be in one link in a docs.com collection, so you can see them on Macmillan and then access these videos. You're free to share them out. They're all public.
So this was another project that we did on silent films.
And it all started with a field trip. We know that visual media is going to be essential for students. It's not just about how they can repeat something or teach something to someone else, but how do they convey their ideas visually. So this became a project that allowed them to look at history and film production. How do they create something that's effective for social media?
And we were grouped into groups of 4, and in that group we came up with concepts for our silent film, and then based around criteria that we created along with the teachers, we developed our scripts, and after that we presented it to the class to get approval for filming and editing. And that is an example of the final pitch that my group had. So after that, when we got approved and had all of our plans for filming and editing, that's when that process started. So we learned not only about script writing, but we also learn things about like visual learning and arts. And after that, we showed our first drafts of the silent film and got feedback on that through forms. And there were a bunch of criteria in the forms, and people would say whether we fulfilled those criteria or not.
So designing this school gave it almost like a graduate school model where students need to come up with their own questions, figure out how to respond to those questions, defend their responses. So it's giving them almost like a little mini dissertation defense as they're going along. And then the peer review gives them the responsibility to look at other people's work and to realize that they're not the only ones who are involved in this process, but their ideas are helping shape and inform someone else. So we're able to use data in that way to help kids take that knowledge, get immediate feedback with graphs, charts, then send that Excel document to their team so they can look at those and say, did I meet this criteria, yes or no? Did my other peers notice that I met it or not? If not, how do I revise it to make it better? That was an example of what the forms looks like for them. The other piece that's interesting with this is the team from Microsoft has been looking at the way we're using data, and they sent a team from Beijing to the school to say, how can we make this better? So student voice became essential in that process as they've informed several different companies and said, this is what we're trying to do, here's what we want to do with it, this is where we're stuck, and we wish it could do this. Within several months, the team turned around and had a new version of it ready for us so that the kids can actually develop their own to create feedback forms and then collect data on their own. So we're looking beyond this as a classroom in a traditional sense. We're looking at reality, and we're also starting to look towards augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and how can we have adaptive learning. I'm starting to pull together some concepts with different organizations and looking at what can you do with things that are made for consumers already, games, things that are like Pixar or Cars, and how can you pull these ideas together with HoloLens in STEM fields to get implicit learning where they don't even realize they're learning and just having fun through gaming, and start building in some of that scientific inquiry, the arts, communication skills. We know that a lot of these devices can collect huge amounts of data in ways that we couldn't as an individual teacher, and it gives us that opportunity to be able to think towards the future of what can we do with this data.
You wouldn't think of using the HTC Vive, which is made for people who play video games, as tools for education, but repurposing these tools is essential because they have this big potential for education, and it's just harnessing that potential that can really move us forward.
Start to look at some of these concepts even as young as early childhood education, looking at cars. How can you take those things in the arts and turn it into augmented reality to catch ideas? Industries that are building cars and designing them now look at complex designs, and they look at even turbulent flow. How can we start teaching those kids these concepts now so that when they go into those industries, they'll have the ability to access those skills? So if you want more information about some of the background of the stories, this is hyperlinked directly into this PowerPoint mix, and we'll share that with you as well.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I have a few follow-ups. Really great stuff. A couple of just questions from me, and then I'll turn it out to the audience. But Jennifer, you were talking about the ability to look at what your stats were, get your analytics, and make. How were you and your classmates prepared for dealing with that feedback, which is not always going to go the way you think it's going to go?
Well, we get a lot of practice because we often do STEAM projects where we present to the class at the end, and being able to take down notes of our classmates' feedback and using that and applying it to our revisions is great practice for when we have analytics on Twitter and seeing those numbers so we know what to do next and go forward with our projects.
Did you, Michelle, set a set of guidelines or preparation around the rubrics and what you might do to set the team up?
That's part of the design. I know that working with even teachers and you try and give feedback, sometimes it's not taken very well or it's taken as a personal attack. And we want students to start realizing that getting critique and feedback makes something better. It's not about you as a person. It's about how you adapt and adjust to make something even better. So I realized that needed to be one of those essential skills that went beyond what can you do as a final outcome product, but how do you receive and apply critique and feedback? So that's an intentional piece of that puzzle. And it helped having somewhat of a design background and having gallery walks and those kind of pitches where you have maybe 5 minutes to create a visual design. And then you get harsh critique from your peers and you go, oh, that's not what I want it to be. So this is where arts in STEM can be absolutely essential. I know people have a big debate about should it be there, should it not be there. But if you use it in a way that you're giving some kind of critique or some kind of constraint that someone has to work around that pushes creativity another way, you're using very similar processes to design thinking or engineering. And if you can do both of those at the same time, it starts pushing convergent and divergent thinking, implicit to explicit knowledge extraction, and motivation. So with that piece, having them build that in constantly and have their peers look at something and know they're not going to always get positive feedback, it starts giving them that ability to be more flexible. And then as a teacher, it starts putting the responsibility back onto the students instead of just saying, what is the score my teacher's giving me, or, oh, my teacher doesn't like me. It goes back to, did I meet the criteria? Can I do something better? How did my peers perceive it? And that shifts the way that the process of education is perceived by students instead of just, I got a red number or a printout on this final score, to this is actually something with a purpose.
And then kind of this is, everybody in this room is obviously committed to the cause here, and you're talking about not only publishing out your work and getting feedback on it and research, but influencing products of the future, particularly education products. What do you think, what would be your advice to this room be around how to make the voice of the student stronger in the development of those strategies?
Taking that tutorial example, I think looking for those students who have published their work on a certain subject and
To maybe try and contact.
Yeah, to contact that student or their school to see if they have anything to say about that topic.
Do you find it a rewarding experience to be contacted and then see the program
It's
change?
very awe-striking when you get noticed by a company like that, and then it makes you want to work harder in your work because you know that other people all around the world can see it.
She didn't believe me at first when I said there's a chance that someone around the world could see this. And what was your reaction when you first said that?
When we were making these tutorials, we were just like, oh, it's not going to go anywhere because we didn't even know about these products. But after that, I noticed that everyone in the class wanted to make something that would be better for the public to see instead of just our class or instead of just our teacher. So.
And on the end from Corinth, they're from the Czech Republic. They got really excited, and the CEO told me that their whole team cheered when they realized that there were students in the United States using theirs. So it was really funny to see that kind of dynamic, that there was this excitement the kids were, and the kids were like, well, they're adults who are seeing this. And so it was a mutually beneficial thing for both parties.
And I was told that they were originally going to make their products just for college students and people in higher education, but since I was a middle schooler, they've started gearing their company towards more middle schoolers and elementary schoolers.
And they asked me, is it possible? And I said, yes. And so if you've even got example of middle school, and he goes, well, how young do you think this could go? And I said, kindergarten. He goes, kindergarten? And I said, yes. Not necessarily that they're running it by themselves, but if you have that cross-age mentoring model, and if there's someone working with them. So we also have in the collection Jennifer's first one that she did with second graders with plants, and then had them co-develop. One of the younger kids was working on biology and plant life, and she was working on something more sophisticated, and we did that also with anatomy of physiology and the human body.
Thank you both
Thank you.
so much for all your great work.